The HOA meeting was supposed to be boring. It wasn't. Karen Moore, HOA president and self-proclaimed queen of Meadow Ridge, stood at the podium, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. "Mr. Carter," she said, smiling that smug little smile I'd grown to hate, "you will give us the key to your garage, for the safety of the community." I leaned back in my chair, crossing my arms. "Karen, if you want my key, maybe you should start by telling everyone why your boyfriend tried to break into my house at 2 in the morning." The room went silent. Karen froze. I clicked the remote in my hand, and the big projector screen behind me lit up. First came the security footage, Brandon Cole and his hired thug fumbling with my safe, the chalk dust exploding like a blue bomb, the two of them slipping and cursing as they fell all over my porch. The room erupted. Half the neighbors laughed. The other half stared at Karen like they'd just seen her without her crown. I wasn't done. "See this?" I clicked again, and the HOA bank statements appeared on screen. A $15,000 payment to a fake company called Cole Contracting. Then I pulled out the ledger we'd found in my garage safe, flipping it open for everyone to see. "Your money," I said, my voice carrying through the room, "paid to her boyfriend for work that was never done." Karen went pale. "This is out of order," she screeched, gripping the podium. "No, Karen," I said calmly, "this is transparency." And then I pulled my garage key from my pocket, holding it up for everyone to see. "You want my key?" I said, stepping closer. "Let's swap. My garage key for your front door key." For a heartbeat, the entire room was silent. Then, like thunder, the crowd exploded. Laughter, applause, relief. Years of Karen's control shattered in a single line. It was the night everything changed in Meadow Ridge. But what none of us knew then was that Karen was just a pawn, and the real fight was still coming. Loved this scene? Don't miss the full story of corruption, secrets, and revenge in Meadow Ridge. Subscribe now so you don't miss the twists coming next. Because trust me, the keys aren't the only secrets being kept. The first time Karen Moore from the HOA knocked on my door, I thought it was going to be another routine complaint. Maybe my trash cans were 2 inches too close to the curb, or perhaps a dandelion had dared to bloom on my lawn. But this time she wasn't holding a clipboard filled with violations. No. This time she wanted something far stranger. "I'll need a copy of the keys to your garage," she said, smiling that tight, sugary smile of hers that always hid a blade underneath. "And your back gate, too, for safety reasons." I blinked at her, thinking I'd misheard. "Safety?" "Yes," she said, folding her hands like a preacher delivering bad news. "We're implementing the new Community Safety Initiative. The board voted. All homeowners are required to provide copies of their garage and property keys to the HOA for emergencies." I laughed, not out of humor but disbelief. "Let me get this straight. You want me to hand over a key to my garage, where I keep tools, equipment, and my grandfather's 1965 Triumph Bonneville motorcycle, to you?" Karen's smile didn't waver. "To the HOA. It's for everyone's safety. What if there's a gas leak? What if a storm knocks down a tree and traps someone? We need quick access." I crossed my arms. "If there's a gas leak, Karen, I'll open the door myself. And if a tree falls, I own a chainsaw. Problem solved." Her expression hardened. "Mr. Carter, this is not optional." "That's funny," I said, leaning against the doorframe, "because it sure as hell sounds optional to me." Her eyes flashed. "Failure to comply will result in fines, escalating penalties, and, if necessary, legal action. The HOA has authority under the Meadow Ridge Covenant." I smiled back, calm and measured. "And I have authority under the Fourth Amendment, so no." Karen's nostrils flared, but she recovered quickly, stepping back with that unnerving composure of her. "You're making this more difficult than it needs to be, Ben. Think about it." "I already have." I started closing the door. "And my garage stays locked." Her voice floated in as the door shut. "You'll regret this." I didn't realize then how prophetic those words would become. For weeks, I thought it was just Karen being Karen, nosy, overbearing, and power-drunk. But then, little things started happening. A notice appeared on my door claiming my fence was 2 inches over regulation height. A warning followed about unauthorized bird feeders. Someone complained about the color of my garage door, even though it matched the HOA-approved palette exactly. And then, one night, everything changed. It was close to midnight when I woke to the faint metallic screech of tools grinding on steel. My garage. I slipped out of bed, grabbed the baseball bat I kept under the nightstand, and crept to the window. Two figures crouched near the side door of my garage, shadows under the pale glow of the street lamp. One held a cordless drill, the other stood lookout, scanning the street nervously. I couldn't see their faces, but when the lookout turned slightly, the profile hit me like a freight train. Brandon Cole, Karen's boyfriend. I ducked down and grabbed my phone, dialing 911. But then I stopped. No. Calling the cops right away would only tip them off and give Karen time to spin her version of the story. I needed proof. So I waited, heart pounding, until the moment I'd been preparing for ever since Karen first demanded my keys. I'd set up a small trap inside the garage weeks ago. A decoy safe bolted to the floor, filled with nothing but chalk dust. Blue chalk dust. The second Brandon's buddy cracked it open, the entire garage would turn into a scene from a Smurf explosion. I crouched in the dark, waiting. A muffled clang, a hiss of air. Then, bang! A geyser of blue chalk erupted from the safe like a paint bomb. The two men stumbled back, coughing, their clothes, faces, and hair coated in bright blue powder. Brandon slipped on the dust-slick floor, landing hard on his back. His partner tried to help him up, only to fall face first into the mess. I couldn't help it. I laughed. Hard. And that's when I hit record on my security cameras. Tomorrow, I'd have everything I needed, or so I thought. Because Karen wasn't the type to back down. She was about to escalate this little standoff into something far bigger, something that would drag the entire neighborhood into the fight. And before it was over, she'd call 911 on me. By sunrise, the footage was ready. I clipped the best parts into a short highlight reel. Brandon and his mystery sidekick creeping into my garage, cracking open the decoy safe, and then getting obliterated by a cloud of bright blue chalk like a pair of low-budget cartoon villains. It was comedy gold, but more importantly, it was undeniable evidence. I emailed myself a copy, saved another on a USB drive, and backed it up to the cloud. I wasn't about to let Karen spin this one out of existence. But when I walked outside later that morning, sipping my coffee, I realized the battle had already begun. Karen was standing at the end of my driveway, flanked by two HOA board members, Lisa Truman, the timid one, and Greg Mason, the guy who loved bylaws more than oxygen. Brandon, still faintly blue despite his best scrubbing efforts, leaned against Karen's SUV, his arms crossed. "Morning, Mr. Carter," Karen said, all fake cheer and venom under the surface. "We need to have a little chat." I took a sip of my coffee, kept my voice casual. "If this is about breaking and entering, I suggest you talk to your boyfriend." Brandon stiffened, his jaw tightening. Karen ignored it. "Actually, this is AB. Out community safety. Several residents reported suspicious activity at your property last night." "Oh, I bet they did," I said, raising an eyebrow. "Want me to show you the footage? It's illuminating." Karen's smile faltered for the first time. "There's no need for theatrics, Mr. Carter. We're just concerned. Which is why, for everyone's safety, we need a key to your garage. Today." I laughed outright. "Yeah, that's not happening. Not yesterday. Not today. Not ever." Her voice sharpened. "Then I'm afraid you're forcing us to escalate this." I stepped closer, lowering my voice so only she could hear. "Do it. Call whoever you want. But before you do, you should know something. Last night's little burglary attempt? I caught it on 3 cameras, HD, multiple angles, and I'm very sure at least one of the burglars looks familiar." For a split second, panic flickered in her eyes before she hid it behind a mask of control. "You're bluffing. Try me." She turned on her heel without another word, Brandon trailing behind her like a chastised schoolboy. Lisa gave me a nervous, almost apologetic glance before following them. I thought that was the end of it. I was wrong. 2 hours later, a black and white sheriff's cruiser rolled up in front of my house. Out stepped Sergeant Deeks, a broad-shouldered guy with a calm face and tired eyes, the kind of cop who looked like he'd seen enough HOA nonsense for 3 lifetimes. "Morning," he said, walking up my driveway. "We got a call about a disturbance. Someone from the HOA says you're threatening board members and hiding dangerous materials in your garage." I stared at him, incredulous. "Let me guess, Karen Moore?" He sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. You're not the first neighbor she's called us on. Mind if I take a quick look around? I crossed my arms. Got a warrant? He cracked a tiny grin. Didn't this? In case so. Then no, you may not. I pulled out my phone and showed him the footage of Brandon's blue chalk break-in. His eyebrows climbed halfway up his forehead. Wow, he said, shaking his head. All right, I'll file this in the report, but heads up, she's not going to stop. He was right. That evening, Karen blasted an email to the entire neighborhood with the subject line, Community Alert, Potential Threat. According to her, I was a disruptive and dangerous homeowner who was refusing lawful safety procedures and hoarding hazardous materials in my garage. She urged everyone to remain vigilant and report any unusual activity. By morning, half the neighborhood was avoiding eye contact. The other half was peeking through blinds whenever I walked past. She was painting me as the villain. And worse, it was working. I needed an ally. Someone on the inside. That's when I noticed Lisa Truman standing at her mailbox that afternoon, holding a thick manila folder and staring at me like she had something to say, but wasn't sure if she should. When our eyes met, she hesitated, then nodded, subtle but deliberate. I had no idea then just how important that nod would become. Lisa showed up at my door just after sunset, soaked from the drizzle, clutching that same manila folder like it was a life raft. Can I come in? She whispered, glancing over her shoulder like she expected Karen to pop out of the shadows. Of course, I said, stepping aside. She hesitated in the doorway, dripping on the mat, before finally crossing the threshold. I handed her a towel while she scanned my living room like she'd just entered a crime scene. Relax, I said. Karen doesn't have cameras in here. Yet. Lisa gave me a weak smile, then set the folder on the table. I've been on the HOA board for 3 years, she said quietly. I used to think Karen was strict, but fair. Then I started noticing things that didn't add up, payments going out to companies I'd never heard of, invoices approved without bids. But I kept my mouth shut. Becca, she threatened you, I guessed. Lisa nodded. My husband runs a home business. Karen told us she'd bury him in zoning violations if I asked too many questions. Typical Karen. Lisa pulled a stack of papers from the folder and spread them across the table. These are copies of board meeting minutes, invoices, and financial statements from the last 2 years. Every big repair job, the drainage, the pool, landscaping, all supposedly done by a company called Cole Contracting. I frowned. Brandon Cole's company. She nodded grimly. Except, it doesn't exist. I checked state records this morning. No license, no filings, nothing. I leaned back, letting that sink in. So they've been funneling HOA funds into a fake company and pocketing the cash. Lisa's hands were trembling, but her voice was steady now. The drainage job alone was $15,000. That's the drain that nearly swallowed little Leo last week. That hit me like a gut punch. A 6-year-old had nearly drowned because of Karen's greed. I took a deep breath, looked Lisa in the eye, and said, "We're going to take her down." She flinched. How? She controls everything. The fines, the security, the email list. People are scared of her. I tapped the stack of invoices and smiled. We've got something stronger than fear. We've got proof. Over the next hour, we built the foundation of a plan. I grabbed my laptop, opened up a blank timeline, and started piecing together the puzzle. Karen's 911 call accusing me of hiding dangerous materials. Sergeant Deeks's body cam footage shutting her down. My security footage of Brandon and his mystery thug breaking into my garage. The blue chalk ambush, because humiliation is sometimes the best weapon. Photos of the ledger I'd found in my decoy safe, packed with fake invoices and bogus payouts. Lisa's board documents proving the HOA paid Cole Khan. Tracting for jobs never completed. We organized it like a courtroom case. Evidence, motive, fraud, and consequences. By the time we finished, the table was covered in documents, and my laptop glowed with a neat, undeniable story. It wasn't just a spreadsheet anymore. It was a smoking gun. Lisa leaned back, exhausted but resolute. What are you going to do with it? I stared at the evidence, then at her. We're not giving this to the cops. Not yet. Her brow furrowed. Why not? Because if Karen gets quietly arrested, she'll spin it, she'll blame Brandon, she'll play the victim. The neighborhood won't see the truth. And if they don't see it, they'll stay divided. She'll still win. Lisa's lips parted slightly as realization dawned. So, what do? We go public, every homeowner, every signature, every pair of eyes. We burn her little kingdom down from the inside out. For the first time since she walked in, Lisa smiled. A small, dangerous smile. That was the night we became co-conspirators. The storm outside had eased to a soft drizzle, but inside my kitchen, a different storm was brewing. One Karen Moore would never see coming. The next morning, I woke up with a single thought pounding in my head. We needed the neighborhood on our side. I spent the early hours drafting a letter with Lisa. It wasn't angry, and it wasn't accusatory. Not yet. It was simple and factual. Homeowners of Meadow Ridge, there are serious discrepancies in the HOA's financial records. Significant funds were paid to a company called Cole Contracting for maintenance and repair projects that, according to public records, do not exist. Before our next meeting, please come by my house if you'd like to review documents, invoices, and evidence. Transparency belongs to everyone. Lisa sent it to every email on the HOA list. Paul Kim, our soft-spoken neighbor who'd been battling Karen for years, printed dozens of copies and slipped them into mailboxes. By noon, my driveway looked like an open-air courtroom. People showed up in small groups, carrying folding chairs and mugs of coffee. I laid out the documents on a long folding table. The ledger, the fake invoices, the bank statements, the videos queued up on my laptop. The first few were skeptical. "Ben, Karen says you've been harassing her," Mrs. Jensen murmured, peering at a stack of papers. I handed her the security footage, the grainy black and white video of Brandon Cole trying to drill into my garage safe. Her jaw dropped when the blue chalk dust exploded across the screen, coating both men like badly frosted cupcakes. Her skepticism evaporated. One by one, people went from cautious to angry to furious. Someone brought a Bluetooth speaker, and we played Karen's 911 call on loop. Hearing her fake panic and shrill accusations while standing face to face with the proof made people's blood boil. Paul leaned against my fence and said, "We need signatures for a recall." Lisa nodded. 20% of homeowners to force it onto the agenda, 51% to kick her out. By sunset, we had 65%. Karen wasn't going to see it coming. The night of the HOA meeting, the Meadow Ridge Community Center was packed. Every folding chair was taken, and people were standing 3 deep against the walls. Karen sat at the head of the table in her usual pastel suit, Brandon beside her, looking like a deflated balloon. She gavelled the room to order. "Before we start," Paul said loudly, "we have a signed petition to add a recall vote to tonight's agenda." Karen's smile was tight, brittle. "We'll address that after new business." "No," Lisa said, stepping forward, her voice clear and steady. "The recall is the business." A murmur rippled through the room. Karen's composure cracked for the first time. "You don't have the votes," she snapped. I stood, holding up the stack of signed petitions. "Sigh. Stay 5%, I said simply. Gasps, then silence. But when my 3 minutes started, I didn't speak. I clicked the remote. The projector lit up behind me, showing the first image, the flooded street, me carrying little Leo through waist-high water. "This," I said into the microphone, "is what happens when Karen Moore's HOA takes $15,000 to fix a storm drain and never fixes it." A few people gasped softly. I clicked again. Karen's 911 call blared through the speakers, her fake trembling voice accusing me of being dangerous. The crowd looked from the recording to me, standing calm at the podium. Confusion turned to realization. Another click. Sergeant Deke's body cam footage played, showing him scolding Karen for wasting police time. Someone muttered, "Unbelievable." Click. The garage break-in footage rolled, Brandon and his buddy drilling into my safe. Then the glorious blue chalk explosion. Laughter erupted through the room. Brandon slouched lower in his chair. Click. I put the ledger page on screen beside the HOA bank statement and a copy of Brandon's fake invoice. Red arrows connected them like a crime map. Your money, I said slowly, deliberately, was stolen by Karen Moore and funneled into her boyfriend's fake company. The room was silent, except for Karen's ragged breathing. Finally, she snapped. "He's lying!" she screamed, slamming her hand on the table. "He's the criminal! He refused to give me a key to his garage. This whole thing started because he's hiding something dangerous." Perfect setup. I walked to the podium, pulled the key to my garage from my pocket, and held it high so the light caught it. "You want my key, Karen? Fine. I'll give you mine, if you give me yours." The silence lasted one perfect beat. Then the room exploded. Laughter, cheers, applause so loud it rattled the cheap ceiling tiles. Karen's face turned crimson. The vote was called. Hands shaws. Tee up. A forest of them. Brandon's was the only one that stayed down. Karen Moore was recalled. Lisa Truman was sworn in as interim HOA president on the spot. And then came the final blow. Sergeant Deeks, who'd been standing quietly in the back, stepped forward with two uniformed officers. He approached the table, voice steady and professional. "Karen Moore, you are under arrest for embezzlement and conspiracy to commit fraud." The second officer turned to Brandon. "Brandon Cole, you're under arrest for attempted burglary and wire fraud." The sound of handcuffs clicking shut was sweeter than any victory speech. For the first time in years, Meadow Ridge was free. The weeks after the recall felt surreal. For the first time since moving to Meadow Ridge, the air didn't feel charged with tension. No more passive-aggressive emails from Karen. No more HOA compliance notices about trash cans being half an inch too far from the curb. No more fear of mysterious fines that padded Karen's secret slush fund. It was like waking up from a long nightmare. Lisa Truman, now officially the HOA president, wasted no time making changes. Within 48 hours of being sworn in, she called an emergency meeting. There was only one item on the agenda: repeal the Community Safety Initiative. Karen's beloved initiative, the policy that gave the HOA power to demand garage keys, property access, and surveillance compliance, was killed in a single, unanimous vote. Lisa also announced a full financial audit. Every resident would have open access to invoices, payments, contracts, and balances. No secrets, no blind trust. Transparency, line by line. 2 days later, a neatly folded one-page letter arrived on every doorstep. To the homeowners of Meadow Ridge, we apologize for the mismanagement of your money. A full audit is underway, and we're working closely with the district attorney to recover stolen funds. Moving forward, all HOA financial records will be available online for public review. The interim HOA board. No spin, no manipulation, just honesty. The difference was immediate. People smiled at each other again when walking dogs. Kids chalked hopscotch grids on sidewalks without fear of unapproved markings. Even the grumpy guy on Willow Lane who'd spent 5 years silently glaring at everyone waved when I drove by. Paul Kim, true to his word, became the beating heart of the recovery. He rallied volunteers, called in favors from his construction buddies, and convinced 2 retired foremen to help us fix the storm drains, properly this time. On the morning the work began, the street looked like an old-fashioned barn raising. Paul brought a skid steer loader and a truck full of drainage pipe. The HOA covered the materials. The labor came from the residents. Neighbor Dan, the guy with the prize-winning petunias, showed up with a thermos of coffee the size of a fire extinguisher and 3 dozen donuts. Mrs. Jensen turned her driveway into an impromptu buffet line, laying out trays of sandwiches and homemade cookies. Kids gathered with sidewalk chalk, drawing arrows on the pavement to show where the water would flow once the new drains were installed. Someone drew a blue stick figure of Brandon slipping into a puddle. That one stayed for weeks. We cut asphalt, set pipes, poured concrete, and reshaped the slope of the street so water finally flowed into the drains instead of pooling in basements. By the end of the week, Meadow Ridge didn't just look different, it felt different. We weren't just fixing infrastructure, we were fixing us. The rest of the town caught wind of what happened. People at the grocery store started whispering, "That's him, the key swap guy." At first, I brushed it off, but the nickname stuck. Kids yelled it when I rode my motorcycle. Strangers waved when I passed. I wasn't a hero, though. I was just a stubborn carpenter who hated Crooked Lee, Ness, and didn't like being told I had to hand over the key to my own garage. Speaking of the garage, with the storm drains fixed, the safe recovered, and the HOA drama finally behind me, I returned to what had always kept me sane, restoring my grandpa's Triumph Bonneville. I spent long afternoons with the garage door open, sunlight spilling across the polished tools. I laid out each part of the bike like a puzzle, cleaned and oiled every bolt, adjusted the timing, and tuned the carburetors. No emails, no shouting, no Karen, just peace. One crisp autumn afternoon, weeks later, the Triumph was finally ready. The chrome gleamed like water. The deep blue paint looked richer than I remembered. I swung my leg over the bike, slid the key into the ignition, and kicked it over. The engine purred to life. Not loud, not aggressive, just a low, confident rumble. I sat there for a moment, breathing it in. The street was quiet. The drains worked. The neighbors waved. I thought about my grandfather, about the lessons he passed down, about independence, privacy, and pride. I used to think a man's home was his castle, a fortress against the world. I still believe that, but now I know something else. A castle isn't worth much without a good village around it. And sometimes, the village needs a backhoe. I eased the Triumph into first gear and rolled down the freshly paved street. For the first time since I'd moved to Meadow Ridge, I felt something I hadn't in years. Plain, simple freedom. Karen Moore's arrest didn't just end her reign over Meadow Ridge, it sent shockwaves through the entire community. The very next morning, local news vans lined up along Maplewood Drive. Reporters shoved microphones into neighbors' faces, asking for comments. Some gave polite statements, others, not so much. I told her from the start that demanding garage keys was insane, Marge. Hunam, the self-proclaimed chair of decorations, declared proudly on camera. Section 3.1 of the bylaws clearly states property access must be voluntary. She left out the part where she'd signed the petition after threatening to monitor my mailbox for illegal stickers. But hey, everyone wanted their piece of history. Paul Kim became a kind of folk hero overnight. He'd avoided the spotlight for years, preferring to battle Karen quietly in the shadows. But once the dust settled, everyone suddenly remembered he'd been right about her for nearly a decade. Lisa, on the other hand, was cautious. She refused interviews and focused entirely on fixing what Karen had broken. Within 48 hours, she'd frozen all outgoing HOA payments and hired an independent accounting firm to dig through years of financial records. When the preliminary audit came back, the numbers were staggering, $147,000. That's how much Karen and Brandon had siphoned from Meadow Ridge over the past 3 years. Money meant for repairs, landscaping, and maintenance. Lisa held a special meeting to share the findings. No spin, no cover-ups. She put the numbers on a projector and explained every missing dollar. For the first time in years, homeowners weren't sitting in folding chairs dreading the meeting. They were leaning forward, engaged, asking questions, and, shockingly, volunteering to help. It was like the neighborhood had woken up from a trance. Karen and Brandon's mugshots hit the local paper the next morning. Karen's carefully curated persona, the pastel power suits, the perfect smile, the queen bee confidence, had been replaced by a hollow-eyed glare that screamed panic. Brandon's photo was even worse. He looked like a man who'd been slapped awake by reality and hated every second of it. Charges were stacked against them: embezzlement, wire fraud, attempted burglary, conspiracy to commit fraud. Sergeant Deeks told me privately that Karen had refused a plea deal, insisting she'd done nothing wrong. "She's going to drag this out," he warned. "Might be a long trial." Fine by me. The longer the process went on, the more secrets would come spilling out. And secrets, it turned out, there were plenty of. Over the next few weeks, new little scandals bubbled up like cracks in wet pavement. Karen had billed the HOA for safety inspections that never happened. She'd ordered custom furniture using community funds and had it delivered to her own home. She'd even arranged consulting fees for a shell company registered under Brandon's cousin's name. Every new discovery sent another ripple of outrage through Meadow Ridge, but instead of tearing us apart, it brought us closer together. People who used to barely nod at each other during morning dog walks were now swapping court updates over coffee. Neighbors who'd lived 2 doors down for a decade finally learned each other's names. Even Marge softened. She stopped policing garden gnomes and started bringing lemon bars to every community gathering. The fear Karen had built her little kingdom on was gone, replaced by trust. Meanwhile, I became an unintentional celebrity. I couldn't go anywhere without someone whispering, "That's the guy with the garage key thing." Kids on scooters zoomed past my driveway yelling, "Key swap, dude!" Even strangers at the grocery store pointed and laughed, saying, "Hey, you're the guy who roasted your HOA president on stage, right?" At first, it was weird. I never set out to be anyone's hero. But then I realized something. This wasn't really about me. The key swap moment had become a kind of rallying cry for anyone who'd ever felt pushed around by authority. It was about standing up when someone crossed a line. And in a strange way, it was about reminding people that their homes were theirs, not the HOA's, not Karen's, not anyone else's. One night, about a month after the arrests, Paul, Lisa, and I sat in Malsiem's garage, drinking beers. Paul leaned back against the workbench, looking unusually relaxed. "Feels weird without Karen's emails clogging up my inbox," he said. Lisa laughed softly. "Feels quiet." I nodded, glancing at my triumph under the soft light. "Feels ours." And for the first time since moving to Meadow Ridge, I believed it. Karen's trial became the biggest event Meadow Ridge had ever seen. By the time jury selection began, the local news had camped outside the county courthouse. Every day, there were updates, interviews, and even amateur bloggers covering the drama like it was a Netflix true crime series. Brandon, unsurprisingly, flipped first. 2 weeks before opening statements, his lawyer cut a deal with the DA. In exchange for testifying against Karen, Brandon pled guilty to attempted burglary and fraud. He'd still serve time, 3 years minimum, but compared to the mountain of charges Karen faced, it was a sweet deal. When the news hit, Karen lost it. According to one reporter sitting inside the courtroom, she stood up mid-hearing and screamed, "Brandon, you coward, we had a deal!" Security had to escort her out while she ranted about conspiracies and personal vendettas. If Karen thought she still had a chance of salvaging her reputation, that outburst buried it. Lisa and I attended the trial's first day. The courtroom was packed mostly with Meadow Ridge residents who wanted front-row seats to watch justice roll downhill. Karen walked in wearing a sharp gray suit and a smile so fake it looked painted on. She scanned the crowd, locking eyes with me for just a second. There was no smugness this time, no queen of the cul-de-sac energy, just pure, seething resentment. The prosecution opened with a bombshell. They played the security footage of Brandon breaking into my garage, complete with the chalk explosion. The jury laughed out loud. Even the judge hid a smirk behind his hand. Then they rolled out Lisa's meticulous paper trail. Invoices, ledgers, bank transfers. It was devastating. Karen's defense, meanwhile, was bizarre. They tried to paint me as an unstable neighbor with a personal vendetta against Karen. They claimed I had manipulated board documents and even suggested the chalk trap had been a setup to frame Brandon. The problem? Lisa's copies of the board meeting minutes had timestamps. The ledger had Karen's own handwriting, and Brandon, under oath, admitted to everything. Day by day, the case crumbled under its own weight. Outside the courtroom, Meadow Ridge transformed. The HOA, under Lisa's leadership, became open in a way it had never been before. Meetings were live-streamed. Financial reports were posted monthly. Every homeowner got a say in major decisions. For the first time in years, nobody feared their own mailbox. Paul led a volunteer task force to inspect every piece of aging infrastructure Karen had neglected. Within 6 months, new drains, updated sidewalks, and fresh landscaping were underway, all fully accounted for in the HOA's public ledger. The change was so noticeable that even nearby neighborhoods started copying Meadow Ridge's model. Karen had built her empire on secrecy and fear. Lisa rebuilt it with sunlight and transparency. The verdict came 6 weeks later. Karen Moore was found guilty on all counts: embezzlement, wire fraud, conspiracy, obstruction of justice. The judge sentenced her to 12 years in federal prison. When the sentence was read, there was no cheering, no gloating, just silence. A long, collective exhale, as if the entire neighborhood had finally let go of a weight they'd been carrying for years. Brandon testified against her one last time, then disappeared into protective custody until his transfer to a low-security facility. Karen didn't look at anyone when she was led out in cuffs. After the trial, Lisa organized a small community dinner in the park. Nothing fancy, just folding tables, potluck dishes, and a cooler full of sodas. I stood there watching kids play tag around the picnic tables while parents laughed together like old friends. The air felt lighter somehow, like the ground itself had shifted. Paul walked up beside me, holding a paper plate stacked with ribs. "You realize," he said through a mouthful, "this whole thing started because she wanted a key to your garage." I laughed, shaking my head. Guess she got the wrong key in the end. But here's the thing about Karen Moore. Even after she was gone, her shadow still lingered. Because somewhere in those missing funds, buried deep in Brandon's testimony and the DA's files, was a name none of us recognized. A name tied to another shell company. A name Karen had been sending small, regular payments to for years. I didn't know it yet, but taking Karen down had only opened the first door, and behind that door was something bigger, something I wasn't ready for. 3 weeks after Karen's sentencing, I was in my garage polishing the Triumph's chrome when Lisa showed up holding a manila envelope. She didn't knock. She just walked in like she had the weight of a secret on her shoulders. "Ben," she said softly, closing the door behind her, "we need to talk." I wiped my hands on a rag. "If this is about HOA budgets, Lisa, we already went through the landscaping numbers twice." "It's not that," she said, glancing over her shoulder like someone might be listening. "It's about Karen." I frowned. "Karen's in prison, Lisa. What about her?" Lisa handed me the envelope. Inside were a stack of papers she'd gotten from the DA's office. Most of it was financial records, but one thing jumped out immediately: a series of monthly transfers. Small amounts, usually between $800 and $200, going to an entity called Redwood Partners, LLC. "Never heard of them," I said, flipping through the statements. "Neither had I," Lisa said, pulling up a chair. "So I looked into it." Redwood Partners wasn't a construction company. It wasn't a landscaping business. It wasn't anything you'd expect an HOA to pay. In fact, it didn't exist. The LLC was registered to a P.O. box in another county, and the listed CEO was a dead man. Karen was sending HOA money to a fake company that wasn't Brandon's, Lisa whispered. This was separate from everything she and Brandon did. That set off alarms in my head. "Wait," I said slowly. "If it wasn't Brandon, who was she paying?" Lisa hesitated, chewing on her lip. "The DA thinks Karen was being blackmailed." That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat at my kitchen table, the financial statements spread out in front of me, tracing the transfers like a detective with a red string board. Every payment went to Redwood Partners on the 15th of the month, like clockwork, for 5 years straight. That meant whoever was behind this had gotten tens of thousands of dollars out of Meadow Ridge, completely separate from Karen's embezzlement scheme with Brandon. It also meant that even though Karen was gone, someone else was still out there, and they knew how to make people like Karen obey. The first real break came from Sergeant Deeks. I called him the next morning and explained what we'd found. He sighed heavily. "Yeah, Carter," he said. "We've been looking into Redwood, too. Guess what? The P.O. box was emptied 2 days after Karen's arrest." "2 days?" I asked, sitting up straighter. "Yup," Deeks said. "Whoever's behind this isn't hiding. They're moving, and they know Karen's out of play." I felt a cold weight settle in my gut. Later that week, weird things started happening. First, my garage door remote stopped working. I replaced the batteries. Nothing. Then one morning, I found chalk dust scattered on my driveway, the same color I'd used in the trap against Brandon months ago. At first, I thought it was a prank, but the next day, Lisa called me, panicked. "Ben, someone broke into the HOA office last night," she whispered. "They didn't take seat. Ash didn't touch the computer. They just took the redwood files." I gripped the phone tighter. How would anyone know we had those? Lisa didn't answer. She didn't need to. I slipped on a hoodie, grabbed the baseball bat I kept by the bed, and stepped quietly into the yard. At the end of the cul-de-sac, under the dim streetlight, sat a black SUV I'd never seen before, windows tinted, engine idling. I took a step toward it. The headlights flicked on. The SUV rolled away slowly, deliberately, like it wanted me to see it before disappearing into the night. I stood there in the dark, heart pounding, gripping the bat so hard my knuckles ached. Karen was in prison. Brandon was gone. But this wasn't over. Someone else had been pulling strings long before I ever moved to Meadow Ridge, and now they knew I was looking. I didn't sleep that night. Every creak of the house made me sit up straight, ears straining, waiting for something, anything, to happen. But nothing came. By morning, I'd convinced myself I had two choices: bury the redwood mystery and pretend it didn't exist, or pull at the thread and risk unraveling something I might not be able to handle. I should have let it go, but I didn't. I spent the next few days digging. I called in favors from old friends in construction and contracting, people who knew how shell companies worked. I even drove out to the county where Redwood Partners was registered, hoping to find someone who'd seen anything unusual. The P.O. box was empty. The clerk barely remembered it ever being rented. Then I got a call from Deeks. "Carter," he said, his voice lower than usual. "You need to stop." "That's not your style," I said. "What's going on?" He hesitated for a long time. "We traced the Redwood bank account," he finally said. "It's been shut down. The last withdrawal was cash, 50 grand, and you don't want to know who picked it up. Try me." Silence. Then, "Guy named Elliot Rains." The name meant nothing to me, but the way Deke said it made my skin crawl. "Who is he?" "You ever are about the Meadow Ridge development lawsuits back in the late 2000s?" Deeks asked. Vaguely, something about shady contracts, right? "Yeah," Deeks said. "Rains was the guy who brokered the original land deals for this whole neighborhood. Half the builders accused him of fraud, but the case disappeared, buried. Rumor was he paid people off to keep quiet. And Karen was paying him." "Exactly," Deeks said. "Which means Karen wasn't the top of the food chain, Carter. She was just another pawn." That night, Lisa and I met at the HOA office. We sat in the quiet, surrounded by files and empty coffee cups, trying to make sense of it all. "So Karen was skimming money," Lisa said slowly, "but she was also making regular payments to this Rains guy. Why?" "Blackmail," I said. "He had something on her." Lisa rubbed her temples. "And now that she's gone, now he's wondering who else knows," I finished. She went pale. The following morning, the black SUV came back. This time, it didn't park. It drove slowly past my house, pausing just long enough for me to see the driver's silhouette. Tall, broad shoulders, sunglasses even in the shade. And then, like before, it rolled away. That was my breaking point. I called Deeks and told him everything. The surveillance, the SUV, the break-in at the HOA office. He didn't sound surprised. "Carter," he said, his tone clipped, "pack a bag and go stay somewhere else for a while. This is bigger than you think." I laughed bitterly. "This is Meadow Ridge, Sergeant. It's supposed to be boring." "Not anymore," he said. 2 days later, the DA's office announced a federal investigation into the original Meadow Ridge land deals. Elliot Rains's name was on the front page of every local paper. That night, the black SUV stopped showing up. Lisa and I never saw it again. Months passed. Life slowly returned to something resemblant. Normal. Kids played in the park again. HOA meetings ended in under an hour. And for the first time in years, people actually trusted each other. The Redwood mystery faded into the background. Not solved, but quiet. Karen stayed in prison. Brandon served his time. And Rains, Well, last I heard, he'd lawyered up and vanished into some offshore labyrinth of shell companies. I went back to my triumph, my garage, my quiet little life. But every so often, late at night, I'd catch myself glancing out the window, half expecting to see those tinted windows and idling headlights again. Because here's the thing I've learned. In places like Meadow Ridge, the battles you see are never the real war. And somewhere out there, beyond the manicured lawns and clean sidewalks, someone's still holding the keys. For now, though, the drains worked, the streets were quiet, and the neighborhood was finally, at peace. At least on the surface.